Love, the strongest feeling you've ever had, may not have been yours. You met someone, and something took over. Your heart raced. You couldn't eat. You couldn't think about anything else. And you felt with absolute certainty that this person, this one person out of 8 billion, was the one you were meant to find. It felt like the truest thing that ever happened to you. Now, what if I told you that feeling had almost nothing to do with you? That it wasn't your heart speaking. It was something older, something colder, something that was using you and wearing your feelings as a disguise. 200 years ago, a philosopher made exactly that argument. And here's the unsettling part. Modern brain science says he got some of it right. But the same man, the same brilliant mind, also got something so spectacularly wrong that his mistake teaches us more than his genius does. This is the story of both. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer, Germany, the 1800s. And to understand his ideas about love, you need to know 3 things about his life, because they matter later. 1. He was rich, brilliant, and almost completely alone. He never married. He lived most of his life in rented rooms with a poodle for company. 2. The most important relationship of his life was a war. His mother was a famous novelist. Charming, social, beloved, he was gloomy, arrogant, and sharp-tongued. They fought bitterly. In one letter, she told him his arrogance made him unbearable. Eventually, he walked out of her house and never saw her again for the rest of her life. 3. He wrote that humanity was a mistake, that existence was suffering, and became famous as philosophy's greatest pessimist. Keep that lonely, brilliant, wounded man in mind, because everything you're about to hear came out of that head. If you like ideas that mess with you a little, a like and a subscribe genuinely help this channel. Now, let's get into what he actually said. Schopenhauer's entire philosophy rests on one idea. He believed that underneath everything, under all of nature, under all of us, there is a single blind force. He called it the will to live, an urge with no goal except to keep going. And your thoughts, your plans, your sense of being a person, all of that sits on top of this blind urge like a thin skin stretched over an engine. You think you're steering, you're standing at the wheel, hands on it, certain you chose the direction, but below the waterline, something else is driving the ship. And nowhere, Schopenhauer said, does that force take you over more completely than in love. Here's his claim, stripped bare. When you fall in love, you believe you're chasing your own happiness, your person, your future. But you're not. You're being used. That overwhelming pull is nature getting something it wants. The next generation, by making you feel it's something you want. In his words, the instinct wears the mask of objective admiration. You look at someone and think how wonderful they are. Schopenhauer says that admiration is a costume. Underneath it, an older, colder calculation is running, and it's not asking whether you'll be happy together. It's asking whether the two of you would produce a strong child. Happiness never enters the equation. That's not what the machinery is for. So when you idealize someone, when they seem to glow, when their flaws become invisible, that isn't insight. That's the mask working exactly as designed. And the more violent the passion, he argued, the more insistent the hidden calculation. That thunderbolt, that can't sleep, can't breathe obsession, to him, that was never the depth of two souls recognizing each other. It was the strength of the biological pull, dressed up as destiny. It's a brutal idea, cold enough that most people wave it away. But then modern neuroscience went and looked, and some of it holds up disturbingly well. Here's what happens in your brain in early passionate love. Take a normal brain at rest, balanced, evenly lit. Now watch what love does to it. The deep reward circuitry floods with dopamine. Lights up. The same system, the same pathways that light up for addictive drugs. That's not a metaphor. On a scan, romantic obsession and chemical addiction look like relatives. And at the same moment, something else happens. Activity drops in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for judgment, evaluation, seeing things as they really are. Read that again. When you fall in love, the judgment center of your brain turns down. You are, in a measurable, physical sense, not thinking clearly. You are chemically idealizing another human being. Schopenhauer said, "Love makes us lose our minds and blinds us to who the other person actually is." 200 years later, the brain scans essentially agree with him. And he pushed further. He said the illusion has to break. That once nature gets what it wants, the spell dissolves, and two people wake up beside a stranger. Passion, he insisted, must die, because its only job was to hold you in place long enough to reproduce. And here, too, he wasn't wrong. Not entirely. That intense chemical state, the racing obsessive euphoric phase, does fade. The research puts it at roughly 12 to 18 months. The fireworks are chemically temporary. Two people who could not be separated in year 1, sitting quietly across a table in year 3, wondering where it went. So give the man his due. On the raw mechanics, love hijacks the brain, idealizes, obsesses, and cools. He saw something real, long before anyone had the tools to measure it. But this is exactly where the genius ends and the blind spot begins. Because Schopenhauer took that kernel of truth and pushed it one step too far. He didn't say love has a biological mechanism. He said love is only that. A trick, a fraud. That when the fire cools, nothing real is left because there was never anything real to begin with. And that's where he was wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. But before we get to how he was wrong about love, we have to talk about how he was wrong about people. Because the same man, in the same body of work, wrote something else. He wrote at length about women. And here, his philosophy curdles into something else entirely. He argued that women existed essentially for reproduction, that they were, by nature, less rational, creatures of the immediate moment, unable to grasp the abstract. He claimed deception was built into them, the way claws are built into a lion. Nature's compensation, handed out in place of strength. He built an entire theory of women's nature and presented it in the same calm, confident voice he used for everything else. And he was wrong. Not offensive, but interesting. Not controversial, but arguable. Wrong. Here's the tell. Look at how he worked everywhere else. Careful, systematic, building from observation, testing the logic, following the argument wherever it went. Now look at these claims. No evidence, no study, no method, just assertion, stated as if it were obvious. The same pen, and suddenly no rigor at all. Because it wasn't observation. It was a wound, wearing the mask of philosophy. Remember the three things about his life. A man who never sustained a loving relationship with a woman. Who walked out of his mother's house and never spoke to her again. Who lived alone with a dog and considered humanity a mistake. He took the woman he could not get along with. And the world that had refused to adore him, and he projected that small, dark room outward onto the entire human race. He drew a map of women's nature from a room with one window, and it barely occurred to him to check. He knew almost nothing of the sciences that would have corrected him. Psychology, sociology, anthropology were barely born. So when he described what women are, he wasn't reporting reality. He was reporting Arthur Schopenhauer and mistaking it for the universe. One mind, one skull, half of it producing insight sharp enough that neuroscience would confirm it 2 centuries later, and the other half producing prejudice so unexamined it embarrasses his defenders today. And it's tempting from here to laugh at him, to feel comfortably superior. Of course he was wrong. Look at him, the bitter old man with his poodle. But that's the cheap lesson, and it's the wrong one. Here's the real one. If a mind that powerful could mistake his own wounds for the laws of nature, could dress private pain up as objective truth and never feel the seam, then what are we doing right now? What do you believe today with total certainty? Believe is simply the way things are. That is actually your history, your hurt, your narrow slice of the world, wearing the mask of truth. Every era's obvious truths become the next era's prejudices. Ours will too. We just don't know which ones yet. That's Schopenhauer's real gift. Not his theory, his warning, the more certain a feeling makes you in love or in judgment, the more worth asking where that certainty is actually coming from. So let's go back to love and to the thing he got wrong. Because the fire doesn't go out, it changes. When the dopamine storm of early passion fades, it doesn't leave a void. It hands off like a relay to a completely different system. Oxytocin, vasopressin, the neurochemistry of deep attachment. Trust, calm, security, the sense of home in another person. 2 currents, one fierce and one steady, running into the same river. Passion was never the whole building, it was the scaffolding. It holds 2 people together long enough for something sturdier to be built. And then it comes down, because the real structure is standing. And that structure isn't a consolation prize for the fire you lost. Because here's the finding Schopenhauer would have refused to believe. Brain scans of couples together for decades, 20, 30 years, show that some of them still light up with the same dopamine reward activation as new lovers. Passion and deep attachment coexisting long after nature got everything it wanted. He mistook the scaffolding for the building. He watched the fire cool and concluded the house was empty when the house was only just finished. And that's the honest picture. Not love is a lie and not love is magic. Both. A heart that is half chemical diagram and half handwriting. The spark is chemistry, real, involuntary, measurable. What gets built on it is something else. 2 people choosing each other, again, deliberately, after the trick has worn off. The pull isn't the choice. The pull is what gets you in the door. And maybe that's the part missing from his philosophy, because it was missing from his life. He wrote brilliantly about the machinery. He never stayed long enough with anyone to see what could be built on top of it. He died alone, still certain, never having tested his own conclusion. So here's where it lands, not with an answer, with the question worth carrying out of this. If you understand exactly how it works, the dopamine, the mask, the fade and fire, the whole cold machinery of it, do you love any less? Or do you look straight at it, knowing precisely what it is, and lean in anyway? Because that might be the only real difference between being pulled and choosing. Not whether the mechanism exists, but whether you keep saying yes after you've seen it. Two people walking on, small, into the distance. A single ember still glowing long after the flame. He never got to find out which it was. You still can? If this made you think, that's the whole point of this channel. One big uncomfortable idea every week. Tell me in the comments where you landed. Trick or choice? Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.